top of the interview. Today on the show we have Dustin Galish of Tree No Leaves. Tree No Leaves has been a band that Sea Level and Jay from Studio 44 have circled around for the last, I don't know how many years. He says 10. I don't think it's been that long. I don't know. So they very much have been like a peer in a way, peer in the classroom. But it's been awesome to see them grow, and every time they come out with a new record, it's completely different. The band's bigger, the band's smaller, and we get into that in the conversation. But Tree No Leaves has a new album out now called Eyes of Xylem, and it's one of their biggest conceptual ones. It has a comic that accompanies it. It has a film, like a live performance of the whole record, live at Howard's, and as part of the press thing, I got to see it. It comes out on March 9th. This probably going to be put out before then, and it's incredibly executed. And the comic itself, just to come up with the storyline and to pick every scene along the way, as well as writing the narrative and performing it, is a next level. It's almost like because the internet, Childish Gambino approach, getting there. That's way smaller. That's a way insane project. But this is a step towards that, taking a concept and making it more than just a thumbnail and some WAV files. It's exciting. It's exciting to see your friends do well and do what they want to do and grow in an artistic way in the direction you've kind of seen them grow. Like I think about some of the early Tree No Leaves records. And it's weird to put too many S's in that. That Jay showed me, and like there was this space there, this like space they were playing with. But on this record, I really think they honed it in. It's a really cool record. I recommend you check it out. Speaking of Jay works at a studio called Studio 44. You can locate them by studio44cleveland@gmail.com or Studio 44 Cleveland on Facebook and Instagram for any of your audio needs. Maybe you have video needs. Maybe you have streaming needs. Whatever your needs are, Jay can make it sound good. So hit up Jay from Studio 44, Studio 44 Cleveland @gmail.com or Studio 44 Cleveland, Facebook, and all the other social media goodness. Now, before we get into the interview, if you can like, subscribe, rate, review the podcast and all the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool artists and sharing their insights with you. That'd be awesome. Greatly appreciated. Okay, here we go. Dustin.
Awesome.
Oh, man. Okay. So tell me about the Kit Kat Club.
Yeah, the Kit Kat Club. So, years ago, we actually wrote a song called that referenced the Kit Kat Club. I think it was called The Grand Ballin'. And it was something that was super we just liked how it sounded. And I think initially when we were trying to make some type of, fan club newsletter, something that, I felt like I had to get some type of name other than just the Tree No Leaves newsletter.
Right.
And so kind of stuck with that, and it's been a really cool thing to reference. And I think that with the Kit Kat Club, that actual term it's from the 1700s, and what it was like a group of people who were considered to be sort of eccentric artists, people living outside of the cultural norms would sort of gather and sort of create art, do a lot of things underground, because at the time, there were a lot of limitations for that, and they called it the Kit Kat Club. And I was like, well, damn, that sounds great. And my wife Sarah at the time was in the band, and so we were like, let's go with that. And so, and plus, who doesn't love a good Kit Kat bar? So I think it was a nice little double meaning.
Well, I thought that was one of the earliest recordings I've heard of you guys was the Java Rave, the live thing. Because Jay, our good friend Jay from Studio 44, he when he started to work with you guys, he was showing me stuff when I would come visit him in Tiffin. And I remember listening to that on the way down one ride, and I'm like, what does that mean? And that's way cool. I thought it was a bit like a candy bar reference, and that's way cooler. That's like this collective, and that's what's fascinating about a lot of your work is it's not like everything's got like this deeper meaning. And like to speak on the Kit Kat Club reference, that live take is this really vast, full, like big band sound. But when it came down to the album with Tragic Magic Mystics, I think it's the first your guys' first full length one. It was much more bare bones. And so what I've noticed throughout like your progression as a group, like it seems to grow in size and then shrink. So what initially kind of happened until that first release? Was it always a big band, or how did stuff get rolling?
You know, the long story short of like the members of the band and how I've sort of like tried to explain it is that, you know, this band really has worked through seasons. It's sort of like the symbology is sort of a little ridiculous at times, but it sort of is true in many ways. And sort of even the name of the band being Tree No Leaves actually is singular. And I actually, when I initially started the band, I didn't think of it that way. It wasn't like, oh, this is Dustin's project. But in many ways, that name then lent itself to sort of seasonal change, sort of shedding itself of what leaves were no longer necessary or no longer wanted to be there and wanted to do their own things. And so there's always been this transition in many ways, almost every year. And so actually when I looked back at all of our releases recently, because I had some time to do that, literally of the 16 releases we've put out, the same members are not in any of those. They are literally, like every single one of those releases is a different incantation of the band. And I never really realized that was sort of, other than myself, obviously, is the only, you know, sort of thing in there. And I think the change in sound is something that was not necessarily thought, like that wasn't the idea. I think it just sort of happened more naturally. And I think when I decided to embrace that, I think that's sort of what's lent the band to be a little more interesting and sort of not redefining itself, but just adapting and changing, which is sort of, again, sort of a reference to a tree, you know, withstanding all that change, but still being able to sort of provide fruits from that tree at times and sort of to create new music, which is really where we were. I mean, we've legitimately been a two-piece, like when Jay and I worked together, and even Sarah and I at the very beginning were a two-piece for a moment. But I think, you know, it got up to 6, perhaps I think it might have even been 7 at one point, you know, and I think when we had played some shows with Rob and Blake Experiment, I think we were at our sort of full capacity of members and things. And so at the time we had really embraced our more jam band feel. And that setup was definitely more of a live necessity than sort of a studio thing. And I think, I just sort of like, it's like I've been embracing that, and sort of, it's almost like it's not that the band has ever stopped, you know, but we definitely change and reevaluate. And so it almost like is like a new band each time, just under the same moniker. And I like that.
Was it hard to accept that this fluency, like to be as flux with it? Initially, did you have like a thought out thing that you were going for, and then accepting that this kind of endless movement of members and sounds is all part of it? Was that easy to roll into?
It actually was not. I think, you know, in retrospect, the band had become a 4-piece. If you listen to the Live at Java rave, that was myself, Sarah Smith, Eli Vasquez, and Tony Papa. And so that was the first time the band really extended itself to that bigger sound. And at that point, that was like, for me, the first time I felt like the band had something. It really did feel like it. Before that, it was a trial. It was an experiment. It was just really trying to see what was possible. And there wasn't a lot of focus. And I think when that form of the band existed, it made me more serious. But that band actually imploded during recording the album previously. We broke up during the recording of it. And what I've now learned is that's not that uncommon for that to happen,
right?
For that to change relative to people's lives and things like that, and just the nature of things. And so when that happened, there was definitely a point where I said, hey, this is the end of Tree No Leaves. I'm going to do something else. And Eli Vasquez, actually, I remember I was sitting at a Mr. Spots in Bowling Green, the subs place, sort of reflecting and reading, you know, Subs and Cheese. And I told him I was going to change the band. And he just looked at me and was like, no, you don't do that. Like, this is your thing. Keep this going. And I still remember that conversation. It means a lot to me, and I respected him in a lot of ways. He's still a really prolific, sort of unique artist in Columbus. And so I think that's when I realized that I could adapt and continue to change. And from then on, it was, you know, it was whoever showed up, I embraced that. And that's what Tree No Leaves became. And I think we still are that way, which is really great, you know, 10 years later.
Eli's a beautiful character, man. Like, he plays a role in so many different, like, just him, like, in all the different bands he's been in, and to point out that he knows that, like, sticking to, like, one moniker, being, like, known as one thing's way more beneficial than doing a bunch of starting over in that sense, over and over again, sticking to one thing and just kind of defining that as you, and whatever that is can change, I think is solid teacher advice. Because that's how Jay met him, as a teacher.
Yes, that's how Jay and I started working together, was through him. He was really the person who, because he was a part of that disconnect, was moving on, but sent Jay my way, and even previous to that, I was doing solo work. So I guess I was wrong. I put out a couple of weird EPs that were solo, and those aren't out there now, because it was really just me dealing with the chaos of my life. And there's some really cool stuff there that it's been released, but this band always felt like it didn't feel right just as me. It had to be this community idea to sort of bounce ideas off of. And so I think him telling me to stick to something means a lot, because it is hard to establish a name, and it takes forever. And so starting over is like, you've seen so many artists who do that because of the nature of bands breaking up. And I think for me, it was important to stick to the aesthetic the band had created, which didn't start with just like 4 people in a garage and we were like, let's start a band. You know, it was a very strange start for a band anyhow. And it's the only band I've ever been in. I mean, this is the only project I've ever been in. And sort of, for me, that doesn't feel that way because of all the different people I've worked with.
That's a beautiful perspective of it. So it's always, in a way, not too many, like, when I look back on with like Sea Level, it's always been me and Cody. You know what I mean? Like, even though we've had different people in it, it's kind of been the same routine. And me and Cody have played in different bands, and like I've subbed for a lot of people and filled in for a lot of people and expanded horizons that way. But as far as like that's really cool that you can look at your own project as like multiple, I don't know, different existences and like different complete bands. And
yeah, it really is, because I think that is a lot of bands can get trapped in that formula, and so it's not bad. It can work at times, and I think there's success in that, and there's ways that works. But I think, yeah, you know, I see you as a contemporary in the sense of you've been at this for a while too, and you have to adapt. It changes, but for me, I think, you know, the thing that I've gotten closest to having something like that was our previous lead guitarist, Calvin Cordy, who had worked with us for nearly 6 years. So in many ways, half of the existence of the band. And I think he was really the only one that over the years really became almost synonymous with what we were doing. But at the same time, it was more just through his longevity and what he was doing. It wasn't necessarily, he took on more responsibilities and roles. I think it's just his sound became more synonymous with what we do. And so it's fun to, like, you know, this is the record that we just put out, has no electric guitar. It's the first time I've ever done that too. So that's like in any ways, it's like embracing the change even more. You know, it's like, well, that's gone. Well, let's do everything possible to make sure that no one notices it, you know? And so I think that's like fun to do too.
No, well, the new album itself, like built, so kind of like in a weird comparison, listening to that Java Rave, that very first live one, there's this, like, you can tell this band's working within this space. You have like this really cool, Tree No Leaves has this really cool relationship with space within the music. Like there's this room for stuff to build, and usually that's what happens in your tunes. And this is just what I've noticed from hearing your music for years now and seeing you progress and hearing it via Jay and like. But what's really cool about this newest record is it sounds like perfect. The space is like, it's like that. Well, the play space is I'm sure there's a Miles Davis quote. It's not about the notes, you know what I mean? But to really work that space and make it feel right is not easy to do. And I think you guys knocked it out on this new record, live, and in the studio set version of it. Which is really cool that you did both, like the live at Howard's, and then used that as like you guys streamed it, right?
Actually, it hasn't streamed yet. Okay. It was released as a companion with the album, but we're actually streaming the concert film on the 9th of March.
Okay, cool.
So you can actually do that at Howard's at 8 p.m. sort of the day of. We're also streaming on a Twitch channel, and it's doing it. And then for everyone who sort of couldn't do those things, it'll be on our YouTube page too, sort of after. So we kind of wanted to, because we don't have that traditional release show. Right. You know, we all know how that's the tradition of that. And they're not always the most successful events, but in many ways there's a tradition there. And I think it's like, that's the best way to really get to your core fans to get them the work that you've put in and try to, you know, support art. And so.
Right. And just to celebrate, we finished the thing. Like,
yeah, it really is a celebration. It's a birth thing. Yeah, it's like a birthday party for the album, you know. And so you never know how the kid's going to end up if anyone, you know, wants to spend time with them or whatever it is. But I think so. We didn't want to lose that, but at the same time, it was also it forced us, because the nature of the album and how we recorded it was everything remote. You know, we were never in the same room at all. Even the songs and how they were developed. We had 2 sessions in early 2019.
Right.
And now
Were they
all
in
of
a
us were
barn or something?
these were actually in our saxophone player's living room.
Oh, okay.
And we just sort of barely went through some progressions. It was like I had 2 progressions, and I was like, "Hey, what do you guys think?" And we kind of jammed on them, recorded them with a cell phone, and then that was it. And then the pandemic hit, and it was kind of like, "Oh well, that could have been sort of a tough place to start." And we just sort of said, "Well, let's just keep moving now." And so, yeah, very different process. And I think we wanted to perform it live because that's still a big part of what we do. And I think it forced us to have to bring these tracks to life in a way too, where with a concept album, sometimes you maybe didn't think like, how can we actually perform this? That's,
right.
And I think that was important for us because we wanted to sort of reemerge with that more of a performance idea based with how we perform, not as much in the improvisation, but in the execution of something that's more narrative based. So.
Right. It's like the narrative based thing makes that improv tricky because you don't want to stray too far away and lose the purpose of the space.
Yeah.
And I think you guys did, as far as like the live take of it, you guys did a really good job of sticking to it and moving through it. And it was like very well shot. So in a way, like this weird like lack of a normal celebratory birth of a record lent to this way to really capture that narrative, I think. And like you're doing multiple different ways to explain this narrative with this record. Like you got the comic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the comics is also like on those lave cut vinyls.
Yeah,
those are pretty sweet. Lave cuts are cool and affordable.
That was such a thanks. I think that was a big part of reevaluating where we were with the pandemic too, was how to distribute music in a way that felt unique. And for us, too many bands rely on streaming stats and they stare at their Spotify to see that as sort of success and how the people are experiencing music. And that's such a narrow avenue. And I think for us and also making music that we feel is accessible to any age, we wanted to embrace all of that and try to create something that we felt anyone would want to buy because one, it's physical, it's tangible, and it was just something unique again for us to, I don't know, just try something we hadn't seen before. It was like stealing ideas from everybody who had put something out, but trying to package it together in a new way. And most of it's stemmed really from just trying to give each song its own artwork in a way that really would help the narrative, because I didn't want it just my vocals to be the only thing, which traditionally is kind of what you're stuck with some performance or concept records is really lyrics. Perhaps there's like, album art, but I didn't want that to be the focus. I wanted the instrumentation to guide you to the artwork as well and give you abilities to kind of figure it out for yourself. I think that's like, I hope we accomplished that, and sort of, as opposed to just putting out, a square image and being like, hey, everybody, it's a concept record,
Figure it out.
Check it out. Yeah. And the idea too, because it's shorter, it's a 30-minute piece. We wanted to make it sort of episodic in the idea to build off of doing more of this. Certainly it is a 2-parter. And so this was our first attempt at creating something that we could then build off again. And so I think in trying to listen to the record more than once, I appreciate that. And so for us, I think adding more elements will drive people to want to go back and maybe catch more of what the story was for a second time or third time.
That makes sense. And just to visually explain it. You know what I mean? So much of a story, it can be visual, and so much of like lining it up with the sonic soundscape, you know what I mean? It makes that narrative clearer. Yeah, I mean, there's some records I've listened to forever, or songs I've listened to forever, and I'm like, wait, that's what it's about? Or that's what they were saying? Like, even just looking at the lyrics can change your perspective. You're like, oh, because you can stretch out a syllable word in a way that make it fit rhythmically that may not sound like how you would say it. And, so Xylem is a really interesting concept as far as what it is, as far like this transportation of water up through the roots to the leaf to be evaporated in this endless pool, right?
Yes.
And it's interesting because the cells that make up xylem are dead cells in the plant. So like they're like this hard like path, and the word, the Greek what do you call it? The Greek word for xylem, it comes from xylon, which means wood. And it's interesting with the tree no leaves bit. A tree with no leaves is kind of wood. But my question with that is, why eyes to represent that?
I think the xylem, like you say, is really that's representing the nature of life and death, right? Sort of this the cycle is sort of when something is birthed, it inevitably has a death, but the tree in many ways is sort of has this ability to kind of reinvent itself over and over. And so my idea was to take two central characters who the eyes were how they're going to experience this life and death sort of narrative. And I think what I wanted to do is we've played with perception. I think that's an overall theme that if I've had anything through lyrics over the last 10 years, it's been about the sort of gray nature of perception and our own unique views of reality. And I think that's something that I come back to a lot, and sort of, again, so we all write about, I think a lot of the artists have sort of a theme that we all come back to in some ways. Now we can deviate from that at times, but I think there is this sort of like overall theme. I think it's like we like certain bands, we like certain artists, because there's some overarching thing that they're communicating that you relate to. And I think for me, that's a big one to sort of like, by the time, when you think something's a certain way, like I'd like to sort of throw you in a different direction and go, oh, that's actually not the way it was. And I think the world operates that way. You know, last year we obviously saw like how people can see the same video and the same news story and have very different perceptions of what that means and what's occurring in their reality. And so I wanted to make that the core of the narrative with these two characters, Elder and Willow, who both are experiencing this life and death experience in a very quick way, but from very different perspectives, even though they are experiencing the exact same thing from start to finish. And I think that was a cool idea, to take the duality, which exists in a lot of philosophies, and sort of show how they're both necessary for their experience. And their cycle then feeds itself to the future ideas of how they can then be used for others' purposes. And so it's like that seed to root, the tree, there is something to leaf is very symbolic throughout that thing. So Xylem was cool too in many ways, because when I was researching it, I did a lot of research, even the trees themselves, like the willow and the elder. It wasn't because they sounded cool. I mean, those are great names. Like, you can almost name your kid those, but it really was. I didn't want to just pick something that, I spent really hours researching different trees, what they represented relative to certain symbolisms, other cultures, indigenous cultures all over the world, and like what their perspective on trees were, because, I'm obviously drawn to them. And so that was a really cool idea. The Tibet Book of the Dead is also something I referenced a bit. There was quotes throughout that I sort of tried to be inspired by. There's a song called "The Elephant in the Room" that really is diving into that space, and I think that was something that myself and the artist were also learning together. And I think that was his experience through a lot of these themes. We kind of experienced them together, so it was like I was exposing him to some ideas, and I think it was cool to see his process as an artist.
So was that
actually happen through the process of making it? Yeah.
Gotcha. Was that the elephant in the room? That's kind of like death. Is that what it's alluding toward?
Yeah, like the elephant in the room now is sort of coming to terms with reality that this is coming to an end, and sort of how are you going to talk about that? And then this is really the first time that the two characters have the ability to have a conversation, and sort of subconsciously. And the elephant in the room, who's sort of this guru, but he represents the reality of the situation, which the elephant in the room is that they're going to die. And so, but they embrace that in a way, and so they become a seed for future use. So it's like that's sort of that's a big theme. I think a lot of us had people who passed away over the last few years, and I always want to come to terms with that in a creative way.
Right.
And I think there's some of that in this film as well, and so, or in this story that we were trying to create.
It's a beautiful way to put it, and it's almost like the Ganesh character, right?
Very much so. Yes.
So the overcoming of obstacles.
Yes. Andy Thomas, who is the artist, was really identified with that, and actually had referenced some characters that were inspired by him as well. So I think I saw those signs when we first started talking about the project, and so I'm glad he embraced that.
You and Andy worked together, right, at a screen printing spot?
Yeah, we worked here at this place called Aardvark Screen Printing around here. They were here in BG for 25 years or so, and so I did graphic design, and he also did that, but his job was he was the guy pressing the ink, and so that was sort of, we met that way. Strangely enough, and I don't think I've ever told him this, but like when I was able to listen to his job interview, because like my boss strangely did it right behind me, and I was like, and the way he talked, he had sort of this like arrogance about him, and I actually like initially was off put about it, but then I was like, oh, he's just trying to get a job, like he should be that way, and I respected it. But then when I met the guy, I was like, he wasn't like that at all. He was literally like the sweetest, nicest person. I just was like drawn to him. I was like, all right, I feel bad that I misread you. It's rare for me to do that. I don't try to judge, but I think, I was probably a little trying to protect my job or something too. I was like, oh damn, this guy's probably good at Illustrator or something.
Yeah.
But anyhow, yeah, that's how we met. And so we really just were friends. He played trumpet, Toledo Music, School of Music, or Toledo School of Art. That's where he comes from. And so he loved comic books too. We traded comic books. We gave each other some stuff. And I remember it was fun. What we traded was almost more like teen comic stuff. It was like not really heavy stuff. I think I gave him like a book where a kid has diabetes and he has like sort of these psychedelic dreams, and he's like trapped in his house trying to get his insulin. It's a really great story.
What is that?
It's by Sean Murphy. I can't remember the name of the story right now. Grant Morrison wrote it.
Okay, yeah,
it's a really good one.
If Grant Morrison's a great.
Love his work, yeah. Right. So we had this bond of comics, and he shared with me an X-Men one where it was like the worst X-Men, and it was this guy about this kid who his superpower is that he could blow up, but he would die. He was like a suicide bomber, but he was like, well, if I use my power, I'm done.
Right.
And he was like, this sucks. So I think what was cool about that is like we had sort of a kid-like bond in the sense where, and I'm drawn to very dark themes sometimes in comics, but if you look at the art that we ended up creating, it has a childlike quality to it, which I love. And I think that's something that I'm appreciative too. That's how it started. I mean, I really I literally had a legitimate fever dream in the sense of like this narrative came. I wrote it down on a piece of paper in the morning. It was like this very small piece of paper, and I just kept cramming more and more stuff on it. Took it to work, worked on it at work for the first hour, kind of sending emails, and then I was like, all right, I'm gonna tell Andy, like, I think I could like pitch him an idea, because I didn't want to say, hey, you want to make a comic book? I don't have any idea. I was like, man, I got like a treatment here. Like, this is pretty. It seemed to come to me pretty quickly, and so he said, yeah, and then started sending him demos, and we worked on it really together to the very end. Sort of, he was part of the songwriting process, so he was able to create the art with the material as it developed and as it sort of came to fruition too, that's unique for an artist.
Right. That's especially if that's not, like, from what I understand, that's not his cup of tea, right? He's never really done a comic before.
No, it was like we both learned how to do a comic together. Layout, we referenced other, I brought in some material that I was like, hey, I really like this artist, sort of the way they play with colors and layout, and sort of we looked into some French stuff that I was really into that had these big sort of more landscape stuff. And so I was drawn to that because we weren't going to have like thought bubbles and dialogue. So it definitely was going to be more art based. And so it was cool to learn together. I mean, I took sort of an editor position. Once he would throw stuff at me, I would give ideas back. I had treatments for characters, how I thought they looked. It was sort of, I would get them a starting point, and many times it would change pretty dramatic from where I was, but never too much to where he always got the heart of what I was trying. So it was cool. Like, we were adding stuff to the very end. Every song title is actually hidden in the artwork. So we did a lot of stuff where we tried to use every ounce of the page too, so that it wasn't, this was the only place we had to sort of help the narrative. And so that's, it made me appreciate comic book and sort of graphic novel creation in that process.
Right, because that's not an easy thing to do. There's a lot of work that goes into it. But it's interesting because your collaboration with this is almost like your relationship with your band in a way. It's like this flux and learning to work with having a thing, but having the flux to flex with whoever you're with to make the final thing. So it's like you've been training for this the whole time.
Yeah, I felt like that. It was like, I've approached a lot of things that way, where it's like it was getting prepared to take a project like this on and do it in a way that I thought was good. I mean, I had worked with artists for so long and felt like I had a good way to communicate with them and be respectful of their ideas too. I think that's a big part of why I like producing music, is to work with artists, help curate them and help display their art, because a lot of artists are shy about their stuff and they don't always have a place to share it. And I think I love that back and forth between art and music. It's a big part of why I was drawn to music in many ways.
So yeah, kind of to touch upon that, has it always been keys with you?
No, started for me as a looper with a Fender Strat and a bunch of delay pedals, and that was really for me what I did for probably the first 3 to 5 years of the band. Did more wall of sound. I was really into post rock, ambient stuff. Robert Fripp wasn't as intricate of what he was doing, but inspired by his approach to sounds. And so that was my approach. And over the next, it was like a 2 to 3 year span where I started playing keyboards and doing more synth stuff. I bought like a microKORG and sort of blended those two styles together. But at one point, ended up purchasing the family got a Nord, this beautiful keyboard from Sweden, and it's just like this incredible piece of work. And so I was inspired to say, you know what, with Calvin, who was our guitarist at the time, and like, you can really control that, and I really want to dive into keys. And so when I did that, I just abandoned the guitar, and that's been really three years now that I've been focused entirely on keyboards, which I really love. It's I can communicate that instrument far better to my bandmates and what I'm doing, and I'm better at sort of listening to them with that instrument. Like the guitar had always been sort of the spider web of craziness. You know, I never really mastered it in a way, you know, and didn't put it in the work too, to be honest, but the keyboard just like, I don't know, it just felt like I could communicate my ideas better.
It's laid out in a way where you can see it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I'm so visual. Yeah, so visual for me. Yeah. So it's just like, hey, like I'm really easy. If you can look at these 12 keys, like we're good to go. You know, so even when I started playing, I had to write like what the name of the note was on the keys. It was pretty amateurish, but
you gotta start somewhere. You know,
but you gotta start somewhere now. You know, thankfully I know what every note is now. But like, yeah, so like, but it wasn't. And I was diving in and performing on it with that sort of base knowledge of just, I'll just hit these things. It sounds cool. You know, so that's been an approach for even guitar. You know, traditional lessons and vocals as well. You know, the only traditional vocal stuff is I did some choir in middle school. You know.
Yeah,
that was about it. So I don't know how much that reflects nowadays, but I enjoyed it. But I remember like, damn, I really liked this, you know. But you know, got into sports, but you know, it's late '90s. There wasn't a whole lot of crossover at that time. So I still remember a kid who sang in choir and played basketball, and I was like, "You can do that?" You know, it wasn't even weird. I was just like, "Oh, that's pretty cool, actually." Yeah, it was weird thinking about that now. I hope it's far more common for athletes to be, you know, musicians now. I really hope that's true.
I think so. I would think so. I think a lot of things are much more like accepted now, but like it's interesting, like how the social construct would put that in your mind that you're either one or the other, and like, but
very strange.
Yeah, that skill set, that dedication, that like self-determination really fits into both of those outlets. You know what I mean? The same work ethic you need to get up every day and do the drills, the same thing you need to do to get up and run the scales. And it's interesting, like, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
No, I mean, that's very true. I have had that same realization myself when trying to not be bitter about how much time I spent playing sports as a child. And you know, I didn't even touch the guitar until I graduated college. And so it was like, for me, there's this part of me was like, man, if I had just touched an instrument earlier, you know, maybe I'd be in a different place, you know, in the sense of whatever success would be. And I think, but now when I see it, that time as an athlete really helped shape teamwork, the ability to adapt, not seeing failures as a means to stopping. And I think a lot of musicians, you know, struggle with that. I can relate. You know, our previous record did not have the success that many of us had expectations for. And you also learn not to have expectations, you know, because then it stops you from making the next thing. And I think for me, sports helps with that. You know, if you don't like, if you want to quit when you lose, sports isn't the place for you. You know, and I played baseball, which, you know, if you're successful 30% of the time, you're a Hall of Famer, you know. So it's like a sport built on failure in some ways, you know. I appreciate that. It really is. It's like, man, this guy's batting 30% of the time. He actually like does something productive. Man, he's like the best ever. You know, like not many sports have that sort of like success rate. And yeah, I like that idea. Same with basketball, man. LeBron James misses a lot of shots. You know what I mean? So. But Jordan said, it was Jordan, you don't make any of the shots you don't take. So thank you, Michael Jordan. You're a part of Trina Lee's determinedness to try to make better records. You know, I really think that's true in some ways.
But that's so much of what any endeavor is failure. And most people have this thing that's bad. And failure isn't bad. You don't move forward if you don't fail, right? Mm-hmm. Failure is part of the equation that is what you're trying to do. It's both the problem and the answer. Like you can't progress or move forward without it. And like it's interesting that so many people have this anxiety and fear of that, but if you embrace it, it's just part of it. And then overall you're successful because you persevere through it and move with it. And like that baseball analogy is really good. I like that. 30% of the time that's you're doing something, but if you look at a batter as a 30% average, you're not dogging them. You're like, wow, that's good. Like it's all perspective, I guess. That's really cool.
Yeah, I think that's like again, it's like if you're going to take something from that world, and that can just sort of apply to a lot of things. And so I appreciated that. I think it's something that I haven't grown bitter against sports. My interest in that is, every year weaned off, but most of that's derived from more competitive nature of things and not
Right.
seeing that that's the most productive use of my energy and time. It's like I still see bandmates and friends who, after their team loses, it's sort of it's like their dog died or something. It's tough. So,
Right.
I'm a Steelers fan, and even last year, like, I don't even care. And there was a couple games where I had to like step outside. I'm just like, I don't even know why I'm having a heart attack right now. So we all have that competitive nature too, which, you don't want to lose that. There's something good in there too with music to keep that up. I think competition's about raising each other up, not necessarily getting on top, right? And I think that's I do like that as well.
Was it? And yeah, and it's interesting. There's this whole Bruce Lee philosophy of taking that the competitive nature and like turning it inward, so you can still have that, and like, but now it's you competing against yourself in a way. And when it comes to an expression like music or art, there's no right or wrong way to do it, and there's no better or worse way to do it other than to your expectation, right? Like, maybe it didn't come out the way you wanted it to, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. Like, if you look at so many, like, just music itself, the Ramones compared to like Bach, return back, like, it's a completely different form of expression and conveyance of an emotion, but you can analyze one for days, and same with the other in just a different way. So there's like this, where does the competitive drive go other than like inwards to better formulate whatever that output is?
Yeah, I think I do like that one. Yeah, to reverse the competition inward on yourself. I think that's really important. So it's like, that's that self-reflection thing. I think that we've all had to sit with in some ways for sure, especially over the last year, of what does that self-reflection mean?
Right.
And like how, yeah, it really is important. Sure. I think that's like a big part. I think that's why a lot of bands didn't necessarily come out with stuff, or I hope they're sitting on things because they've had a chance to reflect as a band about maybe why it's important to keep making music and what type of music that is.
Right.
I do like that.
It's also, it's kind of like the Joe Strummer input output thing. It's hard to put out if you don't take stuff in, and when you're kind of in one spot, to reshift how you take things in. You know what I mean? It's a little more inward, and I think more difficult of a feat than going out and experiencing things and being influenced by the ether of whatever you're at or wherever you're at, like to go on a crazy road trip and come back with a couple songs about it seems a lot more likely than sitting in your apartment watching Netflix. Like,
it is a very tough place to be inspired. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I never really thought of that. That sort of lack of inspiration, even some sense of travel, vacationing. I had a really powerful experience not that long ago. I was driving back to Spencer, Ohio, which is sort of in southern Medina County.
Right.
And so I had this realization that I had never sat in silence for the longest time. I think when I had these road trips, I'm always listening to the radio, NPR, podcast, something. And like, I kind of forgot, wait a second, let me just turn this off and see what happens. And I think it actually forced a lot of ideas that came out that I had obviously been sitting at bay with. And even like, I had this realization of like, I think I need more silence for self-reflection, as opposed to like, that's powerful. And I think hopefully, yeah, like, you're not getting that from staring at your phone or looking at Netflix and all that stuff. I think we're all exhausted from that.
Right.
That experience too. I think that's
my
hope when music comes back, that's a huge part of why there's a resurgence, is because people, the distractions that we all know as musicians, we're keeping people out of venues at night. I think that people are a little burned out on those, and I hope that they're ready to sort of embrace that change. I know I am, and I can certainly be one to blame for that as well, where I didn't come to shows where I could have at times, because I was like, I can just sort of relax and watch anything I want,
right.
Which is sort of tough. And we're all inspired when people come out too. So I hope that's a big thing with live music, is like, we need people to support too. It's a give and take there, I was thinking pro wrestling. I don't know if you watch pro wrestling at all or aware, but like, they've been doing wrestling matches now for months with no fans. And That's the strangest thing I've ever seen. It kind of works, but man, it's just like, I don't know how it can work. You need that give and take, even if it's booing or something, at least there's some sort of realism to the experience. And so
that was really like, so my friend, do you know Michelle Gall from the band Mimi Arden up in Cleveland?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, Michelle Gall's a singer-songwriter and super talented. And did when the pandemic hit, I'm going to Gall spiel for a second. She started this thing called Virtual Shows, CLE, which is I started doing a lot of podcasts to promote that. And they would get 3 people, and they would do a singer and the songwriter or singer in the round, right? So you donate $5 to get the link, and it all went to the artist, and it got super successful and helped out a lot of people during the initial shutdown. So much so it became its own like nonprofit with the Bright Winter Festival. But she started a podcast, and I think they only did 1 episode. I think it's called Shell's Tells, and the first episode was Michelle Gall rationalizing her experience with WWE, and it was Gall with Raw or Raw Gall goes Raw or something like that. But it was personally it was my favorite thing to come out of 2020, and they talk about that. And my Cody and Pat and my grant band, we've talked about that. And it's weird, and it's almost like with like the related more to music. It's almost like you have to bring that energy that isn't there, so the viewer sees that normal reaction, right? Steve, Josh from Smoking Popes, and I were going on a bit about that, and he was saying like, when you do something with no audience, you got to bring that energy as if it is there. And it's such a different mindset from what you're used to. And in a way, it kind of goes on that self-reflection of what do you need to be, to have that level of performance or that level of comfortability to dive into a performance. And it's kind of a weird trickle down of like, what is entertainment? Well, you let people enter, and then you know what I mean? Like it's a
sure, yeah.
It's a weird way to shift thinking of that, and that may have been a jumbled thought, but I recommend checking out Gall's podcast.
No, well, I think that's super relevant to like the concert film that we did, because although as a band we've done sort of those in studio kind of spots where there's no crowd necessarily. There's been a handful of those, and that it's sort of cool in itself, but to be in a space with a history of like Howard's where it's just empty, and sort of how do you feed off of that energy of the crowd? And I think what we did is we embraced the space, we embraced the brick and the history, and then we brought, we projected all the art around us, so we were sort of like immersed in the lighting, and so every song the lights matched the art, so it felt like we were sort of forced into that world, and I think that helped us perform in a way that we didn't feel like we were staring at no one. It was definitely weird. I mean, there's times of, I was actually the one who ended up editing the film. There's a lot of footage where you can tell the guys, when I'm trying to look at their eyes, they don't really know what to do with it. You're kind of looking for that sort of connection with the fans, and it's not there. So I edit those out, because thankfully you can creatively do that. But there's times where you can be like, I just don't know where to look. Like the song's over, right? Sort of do we look at each other? That's kind of weird.
Yeah.
But I try to tell them to get into performance-based idea, to feel like you were more of a character in the world. We wore all the same clothes, and like in the sense of just black. I think that's important too. I think that's something. I guess like that sports thing. I think there's a reason why you're wearing these outfits, right? I mean, it seems a little silly, and some of it helps because like you don't want to tackle the wrong guy or something. But there's certain sports where, baseball is pretty easy to figure things out. But there's that uniform. It's a uniform. It's like the uniformity of feeling like you're a collective unit's important. I've been trying to, even as an artist, embrace some of that, which it's hard when you're changing members. But I think with us, we're all very settled now. This will probably be the first time that we've had people who are all planted in a certain way that we can build off of this a little bit too. And I like that. And I do like the uniform approach, because it takes away, you have to think about those things, right? They're not necessarily, shouldn't be that important part of your prep. What am I wearing? What are we doing? You just like, oh, we're all wearing the same thing because it's about the music and the space, so I think that was kind of fun to try that. We've never really done that before.
And it takes away the visual, like, oh, that guy looks interesting, and puts you more in the perspective of everything. Mm-hmm. And like, I talked to Kevin Eastman, the guy who co-created the Ninja Turtles, and like we went on a bit about that. When you look at each one of those characters, and I don't know, it's relevant because of the comic thing. You don't really, there's no visual difference really. It's the personality that pulls through. And like when you're uniform like that, that's where what your bass player is saying is really relevant to the whole thing, but there's that unique voice on that, in that field, right? And like the kind of touch upon the recording a little bit, because I've seen multiple versions of Tree No Leaves, and like this one in particular, the bass player he got is amazing, and how him and your sax player and you create this space. Like I think this is like perfect. Like going back through some of the older recordings to get ready for this, and that space is there. And like, there's just something about this new record where it's just right. And maybe that is that lack of guitar. And like, maybe it's just those years of prepping towards it, but it's really, really well done.
I mean, thank you. I think that was something, I mean, I've actually known our bass player, Steven Guerrero, for really since the initial inception of Tree No Leaves. We had sort of did this really strange live improvisation thing record where it was just, he was doing ambient looping with his bass, and I had really was not aware of that even as sort of an approach. And so,
so he was
really like this enigma, this really one man show. He ended up getting a drummer at some point, and it was this beautiful thing. And he has a new record coming out. He has a project called Flat Earth Agenda, which he's actually been struggling to change. He's been out for years. He's like, this was actually sort of a joke when I did it. It was kind of like people didn't even know. And he's like, oh no, like everyone sort of like knows. And part of me is like, dude, that's fine. Like, it might get you good press. Like some of these people might just start listening to your albums, you know. But
did it take off? Is it doing better?
But not really. I don't think he's had any excess followers because of that. But in some ways, like people, when he tells them the name, they're kind of just like, oh no, or something, you know. And so,
that's awesome.
But I think, but really drawn to his music, his use of melodies and creativity has always just been wonderful. And I think we've had so many different bass players who've brought different approaches to the instrument. And for him, I think it was a risk to bring him in because of like, it's, you know, he really hadn't performed in sort of that, in a lot of the genres and some of the stuff that we had done before. I think he's actually a metal guy, like death metal, like just sort of really into that sort of early 80s, like 90s stuff. And so he, has that background, which is awesome too. I mean, our sax player actually, comically, those two are the most biggest metalheads you've ever met, and they like sort of bond on that. But their music is so refined in a way that sort of is like sort of counterintuitive to that. So
it's interesting.
Really cool.
Metal is a weird phenomena where intricacy and preciseness is rad. You know what I mean? Like when you think of the genre, you think of long hair and just going crazy and like headbanging and like this kind of, but musically it's very, very tight and focused and like not at all what is perceived with it. And like it's, I guess that that's the case with so many different genres or types of art or like movements, is what's perceived is not actually what it's about. And I remember having conversations with your sax player at that one we played in Ypsilanti. What was that house venue? Oh, I can't think of it.
It's like I forgot about that. Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, the little house show there. I can't remember what it was called.
But it was rad. I remember just talking theory with him out in the back, and it's gonna bother me because After Hours Radio.
That's what it was. Yeah, that was the band. So that was the space. Yeah,
and the space had a name that was.
I swear it was like Shack or something like that, or something like House. I can't remember what it was, but that was actually a great show. I remember we had two saxophone players play on one of our tracks, Swamp Troll. I think that was really fun. I think there was a band called Speak Mahogany. I think
and they're so good,
and so their sax player sat in and just we're like, this one's more or less a C minor. There's a little change, and that was really cool. But I think like Garrett's knowledge of music is so extensive. He throws you for a loop. I remember when we first met him, he would have like a Grateful Dead shirt on and this really long beard and super scruffy, and he's like, yeah, I want to jam, guys. And I was like, all right, that's cool. I mean, I've met this guy before, right? Yeah, this guy, sort of, he's like, I play sax, and get the Dead shirt, let's jam, but he sat in with us at a gig at Howard's, and so he had a history with some of our other musicians. He had touched base because he was getting his master's in music at the university, but he sat in with us in the entire set, an hour and a half, sort of just sat there, listened, didn't play a lot, but he did some things. And I was kind of like, okay, I didn't expect that. That was really cool. And then so learn more about him and his knowledge. And even the first radio thing we did, an interview, like people, they were asking us what are our influences and things. You go down the line and everyone's sort of saying what they like. And I remember he mentioned like 4 or 5 bands I had never heard of in my entire life. And it sounded like they were just, unborn cow, just sort of like just the worst things you could think. There's very brutal names. I was like, okay, I think is he joking? Oh no, he's serious. Like, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm really like, he has these bands, like their vinyls and stuff. So, but that's really great to have that mix of influences. And I think it's something that this record we embraced that again. I think there's so much sax on this record, and the individual who actually, and I attributed some of that to, there's a bass sax player out of Toledo. There's a project called Rover. They used to call it Silent Lions, but his name's Dean Tartaglia, and he played some sax on our previous record on like 3 or 4 tracks. He just came in like wearing like a dust coat and like a cowboy hat and just sort of like played on 4 tracks and left. He was like really cool. I was like, it almost seemed like out of a movie.
Yeah, right.
And so we were really thankful, and like it was a really cool process. And like respect Dean. We sort of crossed paths before, and it was a cool collaboration. And I think I was happy with that. But then once we did that, I was like, well damn, are we committed to having a saxophone on these songs now? Because we playing without, we're like, this isn't as cool. So that's sort of where Garrett came in to fill that void, to try it, and we were committed to it. I mean, it's sort of, I love this new record. There's so much saxophone on it. I think we approached it in so many different ways. Even sonically, the way he plays, it can be excessive and almost non-existent, depending on where you're at in the album. And I think that's something that very appreciative of his work on that. It's something that I tried to guide a lot of that, directed him. Like the opening track, 2020, is very much an improvisation on this ambient track. And I was actually talking to him while he was playing, giving him cues for like what our characters were experiencing. I was like, all right, they're being born. Like, here's the teenage years, like they're a little angsty. And he would start to just push that sort of tension in the instrument. And I just thought that was like, for me, that's as cool as it can get, as opposed to like, man, that was a groovy solo, which I love that stuff. But, I was like, cool to take almost a film approach to things, which I've always wanted to do. Always wanted to make movies. It's just so much work. So many things involved, so I'm trying to make my own movies through this band at times. So.
And film is a whole nother monster of things you got to prep, and it's to make film in comparison. When you look at making a film to making an album, you're like, oh, album's nothing, like the amount of budget and planning that goes. One of my friends is they're putting together a film, and just listening to how they describe that is, I'm like, I would never want to even begin. Like, it's hard enough to get 3 people to show up in one place.
Yeah, it really is. No, I appreciate that. I think a good friend of mine named Jake Eckstein, who we actually did some soundtrack work for his first film. He was a film major in Bowling Green, and put out this film called Apothecary's Cage. It's for this sort of experimental film, but we did some cool stuff with that. And he was a serious filmmaker. He moved to New Mexico. He's been out there for about 4 years now, and he just put out a film called The Art of War, and it's like this.
Whoa!
It's a legitimate action film. Like it's a 15-minute piece, but he worked with 24 fighters, choreographed it, scheduled it all, got it filmed. The audio, just so much voiceover work. There's just so much in there, and so like when you realize the amount of work that goes into something even like that, you realize like. That's something special. You have to be a crazy person to make a film. And I guess I'm not that crazy really in some ways. I'm crazy enough to make an album, but there's another level of like passion and craziness that I just love about that.
That sounds awesome though as a film though. Is it based on like the Sun Tzu's Art of War?
Correct, yes. So he took the basic narrative of that film and then just sort of wrote a short story. It all takes place in like this sort of bar, weird kind of fight club place. And it's a meet of Eastern and Western ideas relative. There's like 2 characters who, one's American and one I believe is Chinese, and so they kind of have this sort of buddy vibe and sort of fighting off these bikers and stuff. It's great, sort of campy action, but for him it's like I in Tesla, like even as a filmmaker, there's a level of like failure and stuff too, because you don't know how to expect things to go. And like, was this a film that was like supposed to be my opus, or was this a part of the puzzle that's going to get me to that place in which I want to make a great film, and I think
that's an interesting concept.
I try to tell a lot of artists that like it's about building the pieces of the puzzle, and like I've made a lot of albums that failed and no one listened to, and some of them I can attribute that got the least listens, I think, is some of our best work, and it's just sort of one of those weird things that you just don't have control of, and if you just move on to the next thing, it's always gonna be better. I think And I think if you're making stuff that's not as good as your previous work, that's when you have to start to think maybe it's time to move on. But I think it's so rare for that to happen. I don't know, how's that even possible? How could you get worse by doing something more?
Exactly.
Sort of
that's I don't know. I don't think it's possible. I think when you're really honing in on something and fine tuning it, it's only going to get better. It's going to be different. It's going to defy maybe expectations of someone who liked something previously, but it's only going to get better. And like, it's interesting with the film to think of that. Is this my opus? You know what I mean? Like, that's a rough spot to be in, because but not at the same time, because you want to put everything into this thing as if it were, but not expect it to be, because if it is, then you're done. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, where do you go from there? Correct.
Right.
I mean, that's a danger. I think of Billie Eilish and her brother. He has one of the greatest quotes in music history, and I hope it holds up, because that last record they put out won like 12 Grammys or something. Right? Just unheard of. And I think when they asked him, he just went, "We're done. I don't know what am I what are we supposed to do? Like, I don't know how we can't really do something that's more successful than this." So I think now I would hope they just make music that they like, because that's enough, right? And I think that will be that's going to sustain. I think that's the only way, because otherwise you would just see everything as failure, because there's no way you're going to do that again. I mean, maybe they will, but I don't think that's possible. There's just the stars aligned in a certain way for people to really care about this thing. And it wasn't that album was that much better than anything else, but it just sort of had its moment. And I think a lot of artists have to deal with that idea too, especially when you see stuff that's successful and you maybe feel as though it's not worthy of that success. That's a struggle, and you really have to be cautious of that. I think that's something that it gets, because if you're worried about that, you're just not working on your craft, and so it's a waste of time, blaming others and things. And so
Billy's career, it reminds me of like Nirvana in a way. You know what I mean? There's like this thing that sticks out, and it's this whole other subculture. And like, well, after what Smells Like Teen Spirit, then there was In Utero, right? So like, it was the complete opposite for everyone who liked into it for the pop thing, who was buying flannel to be cool. And then it became like, wait, what are they doing again? And like, there's plenty of great songs on that, and that record holds up. But comparatively, it's not the same production, not the same, like not the same like radio aesthetic. So like, I agree with you. I think either they're going to do something that they completely love and it's about them, or just something, because you're right. Well, there's no way they do that again. Well, I guess there is, but is that going to be as authentic? You know what I mean?
It might not be, I think, and maybe that's why that record sold so much, because people, at the end of the day, I think were drawn to the authenticity of it. Right. It didn't feel like there was any bullshit on that record. My son loved that record. I listened to it actually. I've been able to dive into pop music and have a different appreciation for it, because there's a place for it. And I think her stuff, even thematically, is really solid. It's introspective. It's rare to have that from an artist at that point, And so I think it could also be interesting to see her process as an artist, and that's what would draw me to her now, as more of a spectator, and sort of trying to see how she deals with this, because it can go one way or the other, and I think that's it's all right. So she'd be fine if she just says I'm done and goes and does something else, So
right. Was it so to kind of shift gears? So with Xylem, there's the opposite, right? There's Phloem, which is where the plant makes glucose and like sugar in the leaves, right? And disperse it to the rest of the plant. Do you think that might be like part of the sequel here?
Yeah, I think that's actually for us to follow up, because again, this was the first. The first album is really about world building, creating the space to exist in. That's not just the music, to bring characters, reoccurring themes, and I think that was really the focus of the first, was that more life and death aspect. I think what we're going to see now with the follow-up is more to really dive into the world that we've created and see the conflict and see the wars that are going on here, and trying to see where that can lead us. And I think that's exciting for me to sort of, in many ways, embrace the fruits of all of this stuff that happened in the first one. We touch upon that a little bit with the song Visionary Canary. So where he sort of eats of this fruit that is derived from our characters, and sort of it gets in these introspective powers of flight and sound and sort of things like that. So it's like the next one's going to be far more action related, far more, in many ways, like what a sequel should be, is the resolution to a lot of the themes that we introduce. I think that's something I'm drawn to as a storyteller. And, certainly every movie, we know how bad endings can take a movie that we really liked and you're kind of going, I don't know what that was, and so
Right.
for us, I think it's going to be fun to go back and build upon all this other stuff that we've done, work with Andy again. And we also have a process now too. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We actually have a wheel that we can put on the next wheel now. So that's really fun to think about. And, we 100% produced this entire thing, mix it, mastered it ourselves. And I think that frees us up to continue to take risks and try cool stuff too, which I'm excited, because the constraints of a studio space is hard: time, money.
Right.
Even if it's free, just people's time, you don't want to take advantage. There's always that, thing in the back of your head that's like, I don't know if I need to take it. I think it's good. I think there's something really freeing about embracing technology and forcing yourself to be your own critic. And I think you'll get better sounds, and better results. The mic I'm talking on now, that's what I use on the record. And I said, hey, you know what? I got no place to record it better than my house, so that's what, all the vocals were done in my side room, while my kid was playing Minecraft. It's sort of, it's a bizarre, it's a weird sort of contrast to the past record that was all done in a 107-year-old church. And there's a documentary crew there the whole time, everywhere. So there wasn't a lot of that space to really feel comfortable. And that record, while I still really appreciate that record, is just very different. It's definitely more of a.
When's that doc going to come out? Sorry,
That's actually, I'm glad you brought that up. So PBS started. They got funding for this documentary, and it's called Waiting to Arrive. And so Joe Goodman, who's a producer who's in Nashville now, was here in Bowling Green and did some work. He put out a film about Neil Armstrong recently that had won some awards. But when he moved to Nashville, the documentary wrapped up filming, but still needed some editing and some other stuff. And so the pandemic hit. Megan Murray, who had done a lot of the filming and so editing, had to take on other work, and the funding wasn't there to necessarily film the rest of the edit. And so wonderfully, PBS reached out to me and Joe, and were able to hand off the film to us now. And so we have the ability to sort of release it in our own context, under our own rights and everything. So it frees up the film a bit in a way. And our goal is to put that out by the end of the year. So it's a big thing for us too. It's a labor of love. It was filmed across 3 years. You can really see the band from from a 4-piece to where we are now. I think the documentary wrapped up in November of 2019. That was the last time we had played any shows. And the form of the band that made this record was that was the first time the 5 of us played together, was at that show. And so it was like symbolic of like the new form of us, taking off. So I'm excited for it. It's a very personal film. It's really about the band as a whole, the history, what it means to be in a band nowadays. The complexities of family, friends, emotions of moving on, changing members, successes and failures, and seeing it, and how do you continue to move on? I think I hope people would be interested to see it for that. It's not really like the making of our record. That's not really that interesting. It's like the space that we recorded it in was beautiful and had a lot of history. And there literally was like a ghost moment too, where like, long story short, Sean Daly, who owns that space, it's called Mohawk Studios in Sandusky, in this place called Halo Live, but we're sharing this very powerful moment. He's talking about his father, and I'm sort of asking Sean, how do I move on with this band? Like, I have a family. Like, how far do you push this? And he said he had a failed marriage because he played too much. He was living in Japan, did a lot of stuff. He was an interesting person. His dad was a traveling keyboardist for years. Played some really great like bluegrass juke band, semi-famous regional guy. And then once he had a son, he kind of like stopped playing and still kind of loved to play. But there's a song that we were working on in that studio. It's called Belief Will Be the Death in Me. It's a song about death. My grandfather passed away years ago, and Calvin and I had sort of bonded on that song. And I play Rhodes on it, and he told me, he's like, man, my dad, I feel like it just channels things about my dad, like hearing that Rhodes. And they were filming it at the time. And the moment he said that, like the light started flickering like all over the place. And he's like, that's never happened before. And it was the weirdest thing. It'll be in the film. And sort of, there's some strange things that happen in the film. It's like part of me is excited to see some of this again, because it's been years, you forget, it's like you all kind of, it's amazing how much even 3 or 5 years ago is you feel like a different person, So,
especially with this past year.
This last year's just been like a blink. And so, but we're excited. Our goal is really to release it, submit it to film festivals, and maybe find ways to play it in certain cities and then do a show follow up, try to reach out to like art galleries, even film houses, non-traditional stuff, even like Negative Space could be a beautiful space to do like we
can project it, man.
Yeah, an hour-long film, we create that environment, and then we do a performance of like, the comic and things after. And I think that's what we're really trying to look towards for this year, especially the fall, because like we're going to do some outdoor stuff this year, I think, just because we just got to make music and start to build that vibe. But I think once we get indoors again, we're going to try to take that approach. And I'm too old to be playing in bars anymore. And like, there's a time and place for that. But that's what I have to prep for. And everyone's like, oh, you got to get your chops. I'm like, I got to start figuring out how to like stay up past 9:30.
Right. Yeah, no, this schedule of being able to go to bed early and sleep in, I'm sure it's different with having a family.
Sure. But it's definitely different. No, it really is, man. It's like a different approach. A lot of people are like, oh man, just keep on sleeping. I'm a little sleep deprived with the kid and stuff. But at the same time, it doesn't lend itself to the rock and roll lifestyle to be feeling that vibe at like 9:30. And so, but for us, it's like, well, let's embrace that. Let's play at 7. Let's play at 8. Let's do stuff earlier. This doesn't have to be something that we're just trying to sell alcohol with. I think that's, for me, morally, I'm not against alcohol. It's a device, but I don't think the music should be correlated to that. And I feel like it'd be nice to embrace that a bit more. So the tradition is there. I'm fine with it, but I don't want that to be the end all.
No, I think that's a really cool. It's like a Mike Watt from the Minutemen. The Minutemen had this concept of jamming Econo. So jamming in the middle, having shows in the middle of the day, so everyone can go to work in the morning. You know what I mean? Yeah. And the Fugazi had this whole thing where they wouldn't be in Rolling Stone because it promoted alcohol, and like that duality of like, this doesn't need to be that, even though like as a bar musician, the reason you're there is to move alcohol, which is always a weird just like position to be in yourself, because you're like, I'm here to promote stuff and make people feel good and I guess, enable people.
Yeah, I mean, that is part of it. That's a part of that dialogue you have when you're reflecting is like, this is actually how we want to exist,
Right.
A lot of us are even in positions where, with families and just significant others, it's like, what's the point of going into a world which doesn't really cater to that either, and sort of, we're not young, we're not kids, we're not trying to make this an extension of our college social network, and there's a lot of that. I've been down the road. There's a lot of bands that's even why they draw, is because they just know a lot of people who are 22 years old.
Right.
Yeah. And that's great. But I think if you're being serious about it, I think you got to start thinking outside the box and how to do that stuff, and even just looking at different spaces. Right now, I'm actually talking with the director of the Wood County Historical Museum, who has this incredible space outside of town. There's just so much space outdoors. There's plenty of electric. It's like this really an interesting space. And so like just thinking of like, why can't music be experienced there? I think it's like, that's what I'm trying to work on now with promoters. I'd love to talk to you about some stuff even out in Cleveland, trying to figure out ways to embrace some non-traditional places so people can experience music, because they're going to want it, but I don't know if they're going to want to cram into a building quite yet.
Yeah, no, I'd love to figure some stuff out. I've been trying to do that myself here a little bit, but like winter's been like, well, let's wait to figure that out.
Yeah. So we're in a good position, I think, as a country, that no matter what it's a waiting game now. And, if there's talk of everyone having access by May, it's going to be here soon. We've all learned how quick time goes. So I think May's going to be here like next week.
Yeah, for real. This month's flown by. February flew by too. Weird. But to kind of wrap it up, if you had to so you mentioned like the kind of archetypes that surround the two trees, the willow and Arden, that are characters, right? There's cultural symbolism within those types of trees. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think through researching the willow tree, really, and that's something that we've been drawn to before. It looks, and it also, I love that it has this sort of hair quality, true, right? It sort of has this like kind of vibe of like a big wig, but the symbolism behind the willow tree is it represents the ability to withstand like monumental like wind, weather. It's this very flowing thing, and so it has this ability to take things on. And I might not be happy about it, and it's actually a very sort of naked tree. It says it's not a very strong tree, right?
Right.
But secretly is very strong, and it's actually stronger than some of these other trees that are very sturdy. Like elder is this very sturdy tree, right? And so it has more of a bush vibe. Like it's very bushy. It's like it's not a flowing thing. It seems very strong, right? It's sort of more of a male, and playing with some of the traditional male-female dichotomies and not wanting to do that because these are anthropomorphic characters. There's not sex here, but there is duality. And I think to have trees that seemingly were so different, and by looking at them, you might even interpret them as being the opposite, right? So you would assume the elder can withstand more, and it cannot actually. and Willow is the one that can actually withstand more. And so I played on that with the characters, where Willow is more emotional, more fragile in the emotional state and the expression of the fears, but is equally as strong as Elder, who is trying to keep his cool and the perception of strength. But he's the one who initially loses all the leaves on him and sort of has more of his weaknesses are shown before Willow's. And I think that's something that I thought was really cool to play with.
No, that's a cool, like this kind of like this tough tree can only withstand certain things, like smaller things can take it down. And like, it's kind of like the proverb, it was another Bruce Lee thing I read. A strong wind will knock down a sturdy tree, where like bamboo can flex and bend back and then bend back up. Or
spot on. That's spot on. That's exactly the theme, right? Yeah. And so, damn, can you apply that to a lot of different things? True.
Right.
Because that was the thing. Like, I didn't like. It gets a little self-indulgent with the tree thing. Like, all right, this guy's really reinforcing it. But I'm like, man, but I'm really drawn to that. I mean, I just am. I think there's such an interesting part of Earth. I mean, they're just sort of this unique thing. There's no trees on any other planet that we're aware of. It's just like, what are these things? They're so, their history and their, part of me believes they have some sort of awareness that maybe we don't understand, and so.
History, it's got a tree in it.
That's a good one. That's going to be one of those weird mixtapes. Yeah. The history. I think, again, that was a really big part of researching. That was to try to get homage to the nature of trees and how they're used through so many religions, and the tree of knowledge. It's just, you can take it to a lot of places. And eating of the forbidden fruit, to me, that was, when he eats of the forbidden fruit, it actually is not a negative. It's actually, it gives him increased knowledge of perception and flight and, freedom from the constraints of his polo shirt and his slacks. It's like, it was definitely fun to play with that. I can relate to those things. My hair is now longer than it's been 12 years. And, it's like embrace your inner weirdo too. I think that's really nice to do. And so,
well, it's almost like a kind of, you can look at that on a ton of different levels, but even just like on the societal acceptance of the psychedelics, right?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. And did you ever dive into Carl Jung?
No, he's kind of one of those where like, he sneaks into other people that I read, right. Sort of, it's always one of those parallels. I think like Alan Watts is another one who's like,
okay,
someone's like, I don't know, I need to read this guy. I feel like this other guy I read is just like pretty much saying what he said, in certain ways. But yeah, what do you feel like? What was Jung's sort of parallel?
Jung's got all these archetypes, right? And he was like a counterpart to not Floyd. Floyd's dude, Freud. But he had this whole thing about trees having this bisexual nature, and that they're Latin. In Latin, the endings of the names of trees are masculine. And even though their gender can be like, it's just, it kind of plays off what you were saying is the only reason I bring it up.
Sure.
And it I don't know, that's one thing I love about what you guys do is like, it's much more deeper than just like a weird trippy thought. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just like, well, this sounds cool. It's really well thought out. And like, there's a plenty amount of jam bands that kind of take that route and like, don't really pay as much attention to, not to categorize you guys as a jam band, but
we're inspired by those for sure. We dipped our toes in that world. It was never something that I thought would happen, but all of a sudden we're playing 3-hour shows. At some point I was like, well, I don't know how this happened, but okay.
It seems like when you genre bend, like you guys genre bend, we genre bend, like, and as soon as you do that, as soon as you hit like one type of style thing and go to another, people kind of throw you in that jam band category because you're like, they do everything, and sometimes it looks like they're improv-ing, you know what I mean? Like, yeah.
I like that. Yeah, but it's the nature of the music. I am drawn to that. I think it's kind of cool. Plus, I mean, the idea of like, to me, for us to be long story short of a jam band was what we learned is like, you can be really jam band in the context of your song,
right?
And do it in a way that there's a reason why you're improvisationing, and there's a reason why you ended it, because you're getting to this other place. And I think that's been really cool to approach as a musician, that although improvisation that's entirely explorative has its own place, I do like building a world to improv in, and then get back to like being grounded, in a way. And so, and it also lets every song be different. You say the live stuff is not the same as the studio. And I think, that's something that we've always done, where it's like, you're not going to see us jam for 3 hours, but it's going to be different than the last time you saw us. And we hear that a lot, where it's like, oh, wow, that was not, you guys played the same set, but that was not even remotely the same. You know, I love that. It keeps us fresh too. You know, where tempo change, instrumentation change. Someone wants to use a different pedal tonight because they're just feeling it. You know, I love that shit. So I think that's kind of
flowing water doesn't grow stale. You know.
Yeah, very much so.
What was it? But so that's what the whole point being. I love that you guys pay so much attention to that, unlike other jam bands that kind of just write stuff and then. Because like the improv is almost like when you have a conversation, you bring up a point, you don't necessarily have all the dialogue that you're going to have with individual written to end on a point, right? That happens, and that's the living part of it. Like you bring up a topic, you converse, and then you end on some type of understanding or solution or conclusion, and like to do that musically in a way that's sticks to that narrative is really impressive. But the whole reason I brought up the archetypes of the trees and having you expand upon that, is there one or a different I can't think of a breed of tree that you represent that you feel represents you?
Oh, that's actually a really good question. I haven't thought of that. Yeah, sort of what tree are you?
What tree are you? Yeah.
Yeah, no, like what tree are we inspired by traditionally? There really isn't one. I think it's more. I never thought about that, but I think that's to me, it's really any silhouetted tree has been sort of what we identify at because of what that represents, and sort of it truly represents change and can at times even represent death. But I think there's something unique about that image that I'm still drawn to. And I think for us, it's like, we can almost be any type of tree. You know, that is like the fun thing. And many times that's more just what type of leaves are on it. But that's a good one, man. I'm glad you asked that. I have to think about that.
All right.
Because I'm looking at some of the logos, they're probably like, damn, we're probably using maples all the time or something. You know, it'd be interesting to see. Probably a maple. Let's just be real. I feel like there's a lot of those around. But yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
Nice. And last thing, you mentioned this podcast you're thinking on. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, it's something I'm committed to. I think I've been drawn to conversation radio, the format, long form, because I think that's really where you can dig into stuff and, in ways that you just can't through even short form interviews. And so, starting in April, we're going to launch something through Trina Leaves. We don't know exactly what we're going to call it yet, but really just conversations based in around music, art, curation, the DIY approach, and really uniting what I think are like the three most important things for all of us to learn is building relationships between venues, promoters, and artists, and providing a resource for them to talk, learn from each other, and express themselves in ways that we can all sort of bring each other up. And I think that's something I'd really like to talk about, and relative things about success and defining those things, and really just talking with people that I feel in the region, really an Ohio, Michigan focused thing to see that I'm just drawn to and want to learn, how are you making this work? What can you share with us that can help us as well as a collective? I think that's I want to get more into the collective musician idea, because it's hard for me to go to see shows and stuff. So I want to give back in a way that doesn't require me to have to be out at 2 a.m. trying to talk to a band. It's just, I don't have those resources and I feel guilty sometimes, and I want to give back in a different way and try to give people my experience through music, what I've learned over the last 10 years, and then seek others who can help me learn and get better and hopefully do the same for them. I think awesome. That's a cool way to do it. It's like that's what draws me to podcasts, and even some of the more, referencing even Joe Rogan, in the sense of what draws me to something like that is there's a quest for knowledge within that doesn't even matter who you're talking to, but you can take things away from that stuff that you can apply to your craft. And so, I'd love to help with that, and do it in a way that hopefully sounds good, looks good, and can help us just build more relationships and call attention to really creative people in this area. I think there's a lot of them.
No, I think that's awesome, because as far as what the $10 you pay at the door, which the band might get $5, and by the time you get to yak at them, you know what I mean? It's already, like how you said, it's already late. And is that going to be as beneficial as taking a time during the day to have if you're comparing Joe Rogan, a 3-hour conversation about how things work and how to think about things and how to share your insights and gain upon theirs, and this and. So I think that's going to resonate more than that, little bit of yakking time at the end of the show. So that's
that's an important time, and I think we all really, as artists, we want that. But it's just it's my experience over the last really 5 years is you lose that conversation relative to oh, hey guys, you really love that set, cool, all right, well let me manically put all my gear away because I'm a psychedelic band. I'm a psychedelic band, so this is gonna take a while. And and this is a little expensive, so I can't just shove it in a suitcase. And then by the time I walk over to the merch table, and then like I'm tired and like I'm riding that high, and then sort of people might be gone by then. And like you got to get them in the moment. And I think like trying to find even conversation with other bands is hard afterwards because you're just like I want to have these conversations with them, and these don't happen before the show because people are nervous and you're all kind of doing your own thing. But I think it'd be great to bring people into Bowling Green and try to find a way for them to make Bowling Green more known for music again. I think people forget that this town has the Black Swamp Arts Festival, which is one of the most wonderful festivals in the state. It has been going on for 25 years. Music from all over the world, and the university has incredible new music festival every year, which brings people from all over. And there's a lot of history here. Even the blues with Heinz Farm, which is this legendary place that they're actually doing some stuff at again, strange enough, having some venues. So it's like, the swamp over here's got some history in music, and we're trying to show our head enough to like bring some attention here and hopefully bring more music and just more people trying to help that culture. I think even the Clazel Theater here, which has been legendary for a long time, this has been bought, and their focus is wanting to bring music here. And so I think
sick.
There's a lot of that kind of happening right now.
Because as far as my Bowling Green experience, it's only been Howard's, and like I think maybe I went to that Java place with you and Jay once, but it would have been like, I don't know, 10 years ago. You know what I mean? It was a long time ago. But awesome, man. Well, hey, thanks for hitting me up. This has been an awesome conversation. I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
So thanks for hanging out with me, man.
No, I really appreciate it, Dave. No, like great conversation, and keep doing what you're doing, man. Like that's half the struggle. Just keep doing it.
Thanks.
So hopefully we cross paths again, and we'll definitely see you when we come to Cleveland this year for sure. So
beautiful.